In today's Terror Tale, I'm joined by Swagglehaus and Automatic Comics as we discuss three iconic pre-code horror comic books. Each of us has selected an artist and will be featuring the works of our artist across this entire series. Swagglehaus, Automatic Comics, and myself have all simultaneously released videos featuring three unique and possibly haunting pre-code horror comics from the most terrifying of times, the early 1950s. So if this is the first of the three videos you've seen, be sure to check out the other videos for 6 more creepy comics. All right, welcome to the channel, guys. I'm excited to have you here to talk about one of my favorite subjects today, pre-code horror. I know it's something that Ryan, you've been into for a long time. Mickey, you're just getting into it. So everybody, welcome Swagglehaus and Ryan with Automatic to the channel.
Yeah, thanks for having us on the channel.
Yeah,
Awesome.
definitely fun to be here.
Great. Well, thanks for joining, like I said. And let's just kind of break this down for everybody, how we're going to handle it. I know I've picked Al Feldstein, so I'm going to do some iconic covers, some undervalued covers, specifically from him. And I know you guys have chosen some other artists, so why don't we talk about briefly who you've picked? Mickey, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. I went with Johnny Craig. So, one of the, or kind of, I guess, OG EC artists and writers. So my picks are going to be kind of centered around that. And yeah, Ryan picked another one as well.
All right.
Yeah.
Ryan, who'd you get?
Yep. So I picked Lee Elias, and I know a lot of people had originally thought that I would go with LB Cole, but yeah, he's got a ton of great covers, just incredible covers, and and one of them being probably my favorite pre-code cover of all time. So I felt I had to go with it.
That's why I gave up Johnny Craig. It's like picking your favorite child. Like, I don't know that I could do that.
It was not easy. I'll just say that.
You have an embarrassment of riches with Johnny Craig. But, I'm looking forward to it. I've seen the deck. We've got some great books to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. We don't want anybody to get bored. So my iconic book from Al Feldstein is it's actually one of the very first pre-code horror books I ever bought. And I chose Tales from the Crypt 22. Of course, it's an Al Feldstein cover. It's a very early issue of Tales from the Crypt. Came out in 1951. I see this image everywhere from, I think, offline, Mickey, you just posted or pointed out that it's the cover of the new trade paperback EC Archives. Seen it there. I've seen it on hats. I've seen it on shirts. It's just a cover that winds up in all sorts of places. And I'm just a sucker for a full moon, I guess, and a graveyard and a ghoul, because it just checks so many boxes for me. Honestly,
and with Tales from the Crypt, they use that theme multiple different covers, either with werewolves or some other monster chasing after people through a graveyard.
Yeah, they figured out very quickly, what worked and what didn't, and they just kept going back to the well over and over again. So, Swag, what's your top line thought when you see this cover?
Yeah, I think that this for sure is kind of one of the most classic, in my opinion, especially like as someone who, I've been getting and immersing myself in the pre-code horror and really, really looking at all the covers and studying every single title there is. And I always think about this one. There's something about it that feels very, very classic. And, we're going to get into like the whole, gruesome, gory covers at some point. But like, I really like this one because, and I say this, but not in a bad way, but this kind of has like a Disney horror to me, where it's like a fun horror. Like, even though it is actually pretty scary when you think about, getting pulled into a grave, but just the way that they Feldstein would draw the characters, there's something kind of fun and inviting about it. And it reminds me of, like, I don't know, going to the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland, or clearly the Haunted Mansion is inspired by all these kind of EC covers. So it's cool in that sense.
And we've talked about that before. I mean, for me personally, a lot of times the really gruesome covers, even though those are the ones that tend to command the most value and everything, like a lot of my favorites aren't that. Right. A lot of my favorites really are the ones that are more, just have a little bit of comedy or something else thrown into them. Yeah. And the thing I also really like about this one is I feel like it takes you back to like your childhood when you think about like a graveyard, and you're just like, you're always worried something's going to come up out there and try to grab you.
Yeah, and just moss hanging off the trees, the wrought iron fence. I mean, they just nailed, the stereotypical vision of a graveyard I have in my head when I think about a scary graveyard. And I think, Mickey, you got a good point. This is kind of like the 1950s sci-fi rubber monster versus the 1970s, 1980s slimy alien, right? Like where everything looks kind of real and horrifying.
Right.
So it's unsettling, and you know what they're going for, but it's not over the top.
Yeah. And it's funny, as someone who, as a kid watching the Tales from the Crypt show and thinking that was just the show. And then as an adult learning, oh, this is based off of, this comic series from the 50s. Like you really do see like the tone of Tales from the Crypt with that, just a little bit of a wink, a little bit of a humor, or a little bit of humor was always in there, especially with a cover like this. And I think that makes this one and the Feldstein stuff really, really awesome.
Yeah, he definitely stayed on the safe side of the line, whereas, you get into some of the other ones, it's just crazy. And full disclosure, I did watch about 4 episodes of Tales from the Crypt this morning to get into the holiday spirit for this filming or this video. But this book,
you'll find often, like, this is earlier, like this is 1951. It's as you get later when they it's like they kept trying to one up each other.
It was an arms race.
53 100%. And 54 that's the brutal years. Like anytime you see like a crazy cover, it's from those 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, they were out there basically by themselves at this point. I mean, it was right around this time when other people really started seeing what was going on, because they'd been in the game since 1950 making this kind of stuff, and other publishers were just starting to hop on the bandwagon. But the thing that still kind of blows my mind is how rarely books like this trade. This is not a hard to find issue of Tales from the Crypt by any means, but in the last 12 months, there's seriously only been 6 sales in the public place. So whether that's eBay or, any place that GPA picks up. And honestly, I'm kind of sad I missed this in March. A 9.4 sold for $3,840. That's not bad. I mean, I've told myself if there was one Gaines file copy I would ever chase down, it would be this, because it's my absolute favorite Tales from the Crypt cover.
And 3840 tells me it was a heritage sale. They always have those numbers
weird
like that.
numbers. So, when you throw on the premium, it gets a little wonky, right?
Yeah. And even just in talking about you can see the 4.5 is 1,000. Like that's not a very big spread. I think we're going to get into other books where you see like the high grade is like 5 figures, compared to like the low grade, which is 4 or whatever. So yeah, I think you're right. I think you missed the boat for a good opportunity on that one.
Honestly, that was one of the first things that jumped out when I saw you pull up that slide. Is I was like, wow, it's only $3,800.
I know, right? And part of that may just be how the Gaines file copies broke down. I know somewhere
it's
out there
probably
there's
a
a
9.8
list
or something like that on there.
Yeah. It's interesting to me, if you actually ever find the Gaines file certificates, it'll tell you like, this is the 14th best out of the 22 copies we found, or something like that. It's just amazing the level of detail they kept. So this is my first iconic book, Tales from the Crypt, number 22. Just one of the best early Tales from the Crypt covers there is, and one of my personal favorites all around when it comes to pre-code horror. Our next book, we're going to go over and see what Swagglehaus has picked. So, Mickey, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I think the game was pick an iconic book by each of these artists, and I had Johnny Craig, and it was really hard to kind of narrow it down to 3. But one of the ones I felt like I had to talk about was this one right here, which is Crime Patrol number 15 from 1949. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the first appearance of the Crypt Keeper, which, of course, if you guys are familiar with the Tales from the Crypt show, that came out in the 90s. The Crypt Keeper is kind of the one narrator that I think has become the most iconic culturally. And for that reason, I think that this book tends to be kind of one of the grails that people target. Now, it's not necessarily like a classic sort of horror cover, but I felt like it was still worth discussing because even though it is unsettling, I think that this kind of the blocking, the arrangement has been swiped sort of many times. And I felt like Johnny Craig would do kind of this trick a lot where he'd have sort of this foreground element, or there might be someone like looking at a newspaper and then, that was being reflected behind them and stuff. So kind of set this kind of cool aesthetic as far as like an art perspective. And then on top of that, it's just the first Crypt Keeper. Everybody wants it. Everybody, who likes the horror books, who grew up watching Tales from the Crypt, enjoyed the Crypt Keeper. And this is just one of those books that and kind of interesting that it came in, Crime Patrol, which would then go on to be, the Crypt of Terror and so on and so forth. So, as far as iconic books, this was kind of my first pick. I don't know, Drew or Ryan, how you kind of feel about this one.
I mean, it's generally true with a lot of these, like with the ones where they're first introduced, whether it's the first Vault of Horror, first Crypt of Terror, that they're never really like horror focused covers. They're still in that crime mode, and it's like the story on the inside that has that element to it. And then it's pretty quick afterwards though. They transition to horror. I'm guessing they sold really well. And so then they're like, hey, let's, we're going to go all in on this now. And for the next, 5 years, they just dedicated almost exclusively EC into these horror type books.
Yeah, just off that, this cover does feel like it's like the perfect kind of transition, because like a lot of the Crime Patrol books are like more cops and robbers, shootouts and stuff, and then here you're starting to get still crime, it's still suspense, but it is getting into this little kind of horror aesthetic vibe. But
War Against Crime 10 definitely is just a straight up horror cover.
Yeah,
but then they follow up that next month, and Craig throws out the first EC horror cover with that great mummy, which is just one of my favorites. But no, I absolutely love Crime Patrol 15. Even just when we were talking about this book earlier this week, when you were thinking about picking it, I really kind of got nose to nose with it and picked up on some of the similarities and just the details that I hadn't noticed just casually looking at the cover in the past. Of course, I'm a huge Tales fan, so it's on my want list regardless. I just never got nose to nose with it. But it's just,
and now you get to pay $2,000.
Yeah, no joke. And
you only have 72 opportunities, and that floor price is pretty high.
Yeah, I kicked myself for I don't know, prioritizing some other things, but it is what it is. You can do anything you want, but you can't do it all at the same time. You just kind of have to live with the consequences of diving in on something else, and this one's one that's going to get me.
Yeah. Well, speaking of those sales, just to quickly recap, so there's 72, having the parentheses there, that's universal grades for this book. And then these 3 sales are all from 2022. There, I think there was probably 4 or 5 that happened in this calendar year, but you can see we actually did get a 9.8 sale, which was at the $36,000 range. So there's your ceiling right there, at least for the time being. And then that floor price at $4,050. So, it's definitely a grail book, I think, for a lot of pre-code horror fans out there. Just to get your foot in the door is gonna run you a pretty, hefty price tag.
Yeah. And I think the thing is when you see that $36,000 sale, like I feel like that really does come from the cover though, because it doesn't have the like a 9.8. I mean, a 9.8 is still even though it's I can almost guarantee it's a file copy, but it's still from 1949. And I mean, it just 36,000 seems cheap to me, especially when it's also got this darker cover, cover, which a lot of those earlier ones, they don't go the black quite as much. Or I think this one purple. I can't remember exactly if it's kind of more of like a deep purple or if it's black, but
don't recall. I don't know. I've honestly ever seen one close enough to really make a good judgment, that wasn't faded away or anything.
Yeah, this is one I've never seen in person. I've had the War Against Crime once, but that's a yellow. That's like more of a yellow cover.
Right.
But yeah, I've never seen this one in person.
Yeah, this is one of those books where the phrase multiples of guide was developed for, basically, because you've never been able to buy it for guide or really hardly, I would imagine, in today's world, GPA. It's one of those where there's a convenience charge or an availability charge that's always going to be tacked onto this, and you just kind of have to pay the piper, if you truly want to get your hands on a copy of this. Now, I'm not saying go off the reservation and just completely go way over comps, but it's not one of those things where you're gonna set the basement sales price just because you're lucky or somebody desperately wants to get rid of this book, because nobody desperately wants to get rid of this book. It's just so good.
Well, it's like with what is it? Crime Suspense Stories 22. Like I've had people ask, about that book before, and and like they'll sometimes I'll sometimes get the question like, oh, do you know where I can find like a cheaper raw copy? And I'm like, you don't get cheaper copies. Right. Nobody's giving these books away. Like worst case, they'll put it up for auction and maybe they lose a little because of that. But it's like, no one's like, oh, I need to sell this here. Take it. Yeah. It's like it just doesn't work that way. And it's one of the things, like from my side, why I really like Golden Age books from I say like an investment standpoint. I mean, I love them anyway, but just from that side is that I like that if you don't have people that can like come and undercut you. I wouldn't be surprised if there's 0 copies of this on eBay right now.
I think they're 2, and they're both listed for about double the price of that 2.0.
So yeah, I mean, it's like it's one of those things where if you're willing to wait for an auction, maybe you get it at like around GPA, but you might still pay some really high price. Yeah. And then once that one actually goes, then those fixed prices are all going to jump.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
So you're always paying a premium for a fixed price because you're like, I want it now. And that's what you're paying for.
I think most of these books are going to be those types of books where, you're going to have to overpay. Like it's always going to feel bad no matter what you have to pay for this book, because at the time you could very likely be setting that record price. But at a certain point, you're going to have to jump in the pool. And who knows with this one? I mean, I think Tales from the Crypt as an IP, I think in our lifetime, we'll probably see another, Tales from the Crypt type of show, or at least an attempt to do it. It's like, obviously we're coming up on that 90s nostalgia anyways. So like, you could totally see them doing a modern Black Mirror type of show, but this time Tales from the Crypt with that brand name. And, not to say that this book has spec value in that way, but, it's the Crypt Keeper. So,
yeah, I mean, it's blue chip. And I really like one of the points, that was made earlier. Imagine what these books would be like if the first appearances of, Crypt Keeper and Vault Keeper, of course, Old Witch actually shows up on a cover fairly early. But imagine if those characters were on these first appearance covers, what it would be.
Yeah.
It's just, we know that's something that tends to hold first appearances back from time to time. Excuse me. And then when you add this level of scarcity to them, these things could be unstoppable, even more than they are now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Ryan, are you ready to talk about your number
let's go.
one choice here? How can you go wrong with that?
Yeah. So I had Lee Elias, and this is the book that has really been probably the hottest pre-code horror book. I'd say probably of all pre-code horror books recently. You could say Crime Suspense Stories 22 is probably pretty close, but this one has just been jumping like crazy. And I think a big part of it is it's gotten a lot more in the public eye. There have been the homage covers for this have just been going through the roof. If you search for Chamber of Chills 19 on eBay, most of what you're going to see are homage covers. Yeah. That's really, there's a lot of them. I think there was one at New York Comic Con. Maybe there was that?
It was at Sabrina, I think.
Yeah, the Sabrina one. Yeah. So, and it's one of those ones where, like we were talking about earlier, that I like this type because it's not like a gruesome, violent cover. It's just kind of like a fun cover. It's got a little bit of fun to it, and it's got the black background. That's going to be a consistent trend you see with the books that I'm talking about. Is I really like the ones that have the black backgrounds. They just make everything pop, but they also then show everything. And so if you've got flaws, creases, spine ticks, missing pieces, they jump out. And so I think that's part of why you will also see very significant jumps in prices as the grades go up, because it gets harder and harder. Now, this one published September of 1953. Like I said, a lot of the higher dollar books tend to be in the 53, 54 range, because that's as you get more and more violent. But this one actually, like I said, it really isn't. It's just a cool, fun cover. There are a little over 100 total on the census. We got 112 universal copies on the census, which for a pre-code horror book is actually pretty high. I mean, a lot of times you're going to find them well under 100, around 50 or so. But when you get the higher dollar books, it's worth it for people to send events. You tend to see a little higher numbers.
Right.
But then when we're talking about GPA sales, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. I remember I was watching that $52,800 sale on Heritage when it happened, and I was just like, what is going on? So, I mean, I had estimated it would probably go, I think, around like 40. And so I still thought it would be high, but this was a big sale. And last year, you'll see a lot of the books that I talk about, I put the high sales on here. A lot of them had a high sale in November of 21. That's because there was a collection called the Black Cat Collection. There's a collector, you can find him on Instagram. He had one of the most incredible pre-code horror collections, and he sold a lot of these really high grade books through Heritage, and a lot of them were top of census. Now this one is top of census. There's a single 9.6 that was this book, sold for $102,000. I think the current owner is the man behind the red hood on Instagram. I'm pretty sure he's the one that has that book.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But with this one, there have been 8 sales in the last 12 months, which is actually, I feel like it's kind of high, and I think, and part of that is because the values have come up so much. It's like with anything, when you start to see these big jumps, more of them will come out, but you still have a very limited supply. Now there is one available on eBay right now. So if you want to go search for one on eBay, there is one out there at the moment, but there is a lot of homage covers that you can get as well. But yeah, Drew or Mickey, what are your thoughts?
I tell you, the thing that kind of shocked me about this book most recently is the original art that sold last year. I thought it kind of underperformed. I mean, it didn't go for a low number. It was around $250,000 or something, wasn't it?
Oh, I wasn't aware that the original art sold. So
yeah,
that does honestly sound low. And I bet if it sold this year, it would be maybe it would be different.
So I was surprised by that, but this is on everybody's top 3, top 2, top 1. Everybody wants this cover, and I think they always have. I know a guy who knows a guy, Classic Tale, and he showed me a picture of his buddy's collection of Chamber of Chills 19. And I say that because there's 15, 20 copies splayed out on this guy's counter. And I felt inferior as a collector immediately.
There are a few people on Instagram that have like these types of books stacked.
Yeah, they definitely got the flex picks for sure.
It's just, and it's unbelievable. But no, I mean, I don't know what else there is to say about this book. It's top of the mountain. It's just fantastic, and I don't know anybody who's interested in pre-code horror who wouldn't like to have a copy of this book. So I think you just kind of have to get this one out of the way so you can talk about all the rest of the stuff Elias did. So
yeah.
Right on.
Well, just to kind of reiterate, I think what's cool about this, and like Ryan, you were saying, is, I understand that some of the history of having the violent covers is part of the allure because of like the whole censorship aspect. But, when you just look at this, like in a kind of a vacuum and just evaluating it from an art perspective, like it's just really, really well done. Like this cover, beyond comic books, beyond whatever, like there's a reason why people like to tattoo this on their body. Like there's a reason why, this is the type of thing that, if you got money, you would want this in your game room. It has this kind of cool, classy, rich aesthetic to it. So I understand why people want it. And, and it's been made famous. I mean, all the way back when the Misfits had this as a cover album, and it's kind of become a pop culture image in its own right. And and that's really what's interesting about all comic books, but even in these ones that don't have, like, say, an MCU movie attached to it, there still is like a kind of a cultural aspect that makes people want this book and appreciate the cover. And yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, like you said, it's like once the snowball rolls and everyone is like trying to capitalize on the new hype for this book, obviously it sold quite a bit this past year, but are we going to see a lot of holders, and then maybe no one's going to talk about this book for, say, the next 4 years until the next massive sale that causes people to want to sell? Or it'll be interesting to watch.
Collections like that Black Cat collection coming up do have significant impacts on this area of the hobby as a whole,
right?
Because you had a bunch of very high grade copies come up for sale. It's like the Promise collection.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, they end up causing other books to jump because it
reprices the market, essentially.
reprices the market. Yep.
For sure.
And I like what you said earlier, where you said like putting it up in your game room or your but because we've talked about that, where there's certain covers where you're like, I don't really want to have that up.
Yeah.
Well, this one you could have up and like it looks cool.
Well, I can explain this one to my mother-in-law.
That's the thing. I mean, let's say you're that hypothetical buyer who's spending $102,000 on this. You probably have a pretty nice house for yourself and all that, and you got a nice game room. And when your non-comic book fan or non-comic book friends come over for your fancy dinner party, like they will kind of walk by this image and be like, oh, well, that's really cool, you know, or they can appreciate it. But if you have like some of the other books we're about to show, you know, and some of the other videos, they might be like, oh, yeah, Ryan, that seems like a weird hobby you got going on here. You know?
Remind me not to go down in the basement alone with you if this is the kind of stuff you're hanging on the wall. But I think one thing we haven't mentioned just yet, and I'll throw it out here, just to touch on it. I think and this has been my experience, let me know if you guys have found something different. I feel like out of all of the long established fandoms within comics, like one of the most just adamantly against slabbing books groups within collecting comics is the pre-code horror guys. I feel like those guys, generally the old timers, the guys who've been collecting this kind of stuff back when it was weird and just kind of one of the dark corners of the hobby that people didn't like to talk about, like they're sitting on all this stuff, but they're also the people who would crack open one of these if they bought it slab. It's like, yeah, I don't like slab books. So I wonder how much inventory is actually sitting out there, but it's in the mind, or in the hands of those collectors that are of the old frame of mind, where it's like, if I put this in plastic, I can't read it.
Well, I mean, I'll say like the people that I've seen post like stacks of these types of books on Instagram, generally it's like maybe 2 or 3 graded copies and then like 10 or 12 on.
So it's like the copies I just picked up in the last couple of years and the ones I picked up, in the last 20 to 25 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's just a thought. The conversation continues over in Swagglehaus and Automatic Comics' videos, which are available now. Check out the description down below for links to those videos. If you enjoyed our conversation here, then keep an eye out for the next round of videos, which we'll be releasing on Sunday, October 30th, where we each discuss 3 more pre-code horror comics, but this time we focus on undervalued issues from our selected artists. Collect responsibly, and I'll see you in the next one.